The sun was hot that day in Arizona. It was the kind of heat that made everything shimmer and dance in the distance. Sarah Mitchell stood outside her small wooden cabin, her hands deep in bread dough. She pushed and folded the dough over and over again. Her arms were tired, but she kept working. Making bread was something she knew how to do well. It made her feel normal in a place that often felt anything but normal. Sarah was 32 years old. Her face showed signs of hard living under the desert sun. Her hands were rough and calloused from work. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a bun, though a few strands had escaped and stuck to her sweaty forehead. She had been living alone in this cabin for almost a year now. Her husband Thomas had died last winter from a fever. He had been gone so fast. 1 week he was fine, and the next week he was in the ground behind the cabin. The cabin sat alone in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was 15 miles to the east. Sarah could see for miles in every direction. There were rocks and sand and small scrub bushes. Sometimes she saw a rabbit or a lizard. Mostly she saw nothing but empty land and blue sky. It was 1876, and this part of Arizona territory was rough country. Most people thought she was crazy for staying out here alone, but this was her land now. Thomas had claimed it, and she was not ready to give it up. As Sarah kneaded the bread, she started to hum. It was an old song her mother had taught her back in Ireland. Sarah had been just a little girl when they came to America. The song was about a girl waiting for her love to come home from the sea. The melody was soft and sad. Sarah did not even realize she was humming. It just came out naturally when she worked with her hands. The sound floated out across the empty desert like a bird looking for a place to land. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the horse at first. The wind was blowing, making small whistling sounds through the rocks, but then a shadow fell across her table. Sarah's hands stopped moving. Her heart started to beat faster. Slowly, she looked up. An Apache warrior sat on his horse just 20 feet away from her. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The man was young and strong-looking. His skin was dark from the sun. He wore traditional clothing with a band around his head. His black hair was long and hung past his shoulders. He had a rifle strapped to his back. His horse was painted with symbols Sarah did not understand. The warrior was looking right at her, his dark eyes steady and intense. Sarah knew she should be terrified. Everyone in the nearby town talked about the Apache. They told stories about raids and attacks. They said the Apache were dangerous and cruel. The shopkeeper in town had told her just last month that a family had been attacked 30 miles south. Sarah had heard these stories over and over, but standing there with her hands in the bread dough, she found she could not move. She could not even scream. The warrior did not move either. He just sat on his horse and looked at her. But there was something strange about the way he looked. He did not look angry or threatening. He looked curious. His head was tilted slightly to one side like he was listening to something. Then Sarah understood. He had heard her humming. He had stopped because of her song. They stayed like that for what felt like a very long time but was probably only a minute. Sarah standing at her table with dough on her hands. The warrior sitting on his horse watching her. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The wind blew dust across the yard between them. A bird called out somewhere in the distance. Then the warrior did something Sarah never expected. He slowly raised one hand, palm facing forward. It seemed like a peaceful gesture. Then he opened his mouth and spoke one word. Sarah did not understand the word. It was in his language, not hers. But his voice was calm and low. He was not yelling or threatening. He was just speaking to her like one person to another. Sarah did not know what to do. Should she run inside the cabin? Should she scream? Should she reach for the old rifle Thomas had left by the door? But something stopped her from doing any of those things. Maybe it was the way the warrior had raised his hand. Maybe it was the calm look in his eyes. Or maybe it was what happened next. The warrior hummed. He hummed a few notes of the melody Sarah had been singing. It was not perfect. He got some of the notes wrong, but it was clearly the same song. He hummed it like a question, like he was asking her about it. His face showed interest in something that looked almost like wonder. Sarah felt her fear begin to shift into something else. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity. This Apache warrior had stopped his journey because he heard her humming an Irish song. He had listened to it. He had been interested enough to try to hum it back to her. This was not what the people in town had told her would happen if she ever met an Apache. She found herself doing something very foolish. She hummed the melody back to him, a little longer this time. She sang the full phrase of the song. Her voice was shaky and quiet, but she did it. The warrior listened carefully. Then he nodded once, as if he understood something. For another long moment, they looked at each other across the dusty yard. Sarah saw that the warrior was younger than she had first thought. Maybe around 30 years old. There were scars on his arms and chest. He had clearly been a fighter. But right now, in this moment, he was just a man who had stopped to listen to a song. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, the warrior turned his horse. He did not say anything else. He did not make any threatening moves. He simply rode away, heading north toward the mountains. Sarah watched him go until he was just a small dot in the distance, and then until he disappeared completely. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were still covered in bread dough. The dough had started to dry out in the hot sun. She realized she was shaking. Her legs felt weak. She pulled her hands out of the dough and wiped them on her apron. Then she sat down hard on the bench next to her table. What had just happened? An Apache warrior had ridden up to her cabin. He had listened to her sing. He had hummed back to her. And then he had ridden away without hurting her or taking anything. It made no sense based on everything she had been told. Sarah sat there for a long time trying to understand it. The sun moved across the sky. The dough on the table became useless. She would have to make new dough tomorrow. But Sarah did not care about the bread anymore. She kept thinking about the warrior's face, the way he had listened so carefully, the way he had tried to copy her melody, the way he had looked at her with curiosity instead of hatred. That night, Sarah lay in her bed unable to sleep. She kept expecting to hear horses outside. She kept expecting the warrior to come back with others. But the night stayed quiet except for the usual sounds of the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance. The wind rattled the shutters. Nothing else. Sarah thought about her life and how lonely it had been since Thomas died. She thought about the town and how the people there looked at her with pity. She thought about this wild land and how little she understood it. And she thought about the Apache warrior who had stopped to listen to her song. She did not know his name. She did not know where he had come from or where he was going. She did not know if she would ever see him again. But something had changed in that moment when their eyes met. Something had passed between them that Sarah could not quite name. It was not friendship. It was not trust. But it was something. A small crack in the wall of fear and hatred that separated their two peoples. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself humming the old Irish melody one more time. And she wondered, somewhere out in the desert night, if the Apache warrior was humming it too. 3 days passed after the warrior first appeared. Sarah went about her normal work, but she kept looking toward the horizon. She did not know why. Part of her hoped she would never see the Apache man again. That part wanted life to go back to normal and safe. But another part of her, a part she did not fully understand, kept watching for him. On the 4th day, he came back. Sarah was pulling weeds from her small vegetable garden when she heard the horse. This time she was not surprised. She stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. The warrior rode up to the same spot as before. He stayed on his horse. He did not come any closer to the cabin. He just sat there and watched her. Sarah did not know what to do, so she went back to pulling weeds. Her hands shook a little, but she tried to act normal. She could feel him watching her. After a few minutes, she started to hum again. It was the same song as before. She did not plan it. It just came out. The warrior listened. When she finished the melody, he hummed something back. But this time it was a different tune. It was his own song. The melody was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard. It had strange intervals and a rhythm that felt wild and free. It reminded her of wind moving through canyons. Sarah stopped her work and listened. When he finished, she looked up at him. He was looking right at her, waiting to see what she would do. Sarah did something brave. She tried to hum his melody back to him. She got it wrong. Her version was clumsy and she missed several notes. But she tried. The warrior's face changed. The corners of his mouth moved slightly. It might have been the start of a smile. Then he turned his horse and rode away again. This became a pattern. Every few days the warrior would appear. Sometimes Sarah was working outside. Sometimes she was hanging laundry to dry. Once she was sitting on her porch step mending a torn shirt. He always stayed at the same distance. He never tried to come into the cabin. He never made threatening moves. They would look at each other. Sometimes one of them would hum a melody. Sometimes they just sat in silence for a few minutes, then he would leave. Sarah knew this was dangerous. If anyone from town found out she was having peaceful meetings with an Apache warrior, they would think she had lost her mind. They might even think she was helping the enemy. The people in town were afraid of the Apache. There had been fights between settlers and Apache bands. People had died on both sides. The air was full of anger and mistrust, but Sarah started to look forward to the warriors' visits. They broke up the loneliness of her days. And there was something else, too. The warrior treated her with a kind of respect she had not felt in a long time. He did not look at her the way the men in town did, with pity or suspicion. He looked at her like she was a person worth paying attention to. After several weeks of these visits, something changed. The warrior arrived one morning while Sarah was outside beating dust from a blanket. He dismounted from his horse. Sarah's heart started pounding. This was new. He had never gotten off his horse before, but he did not come toward her. Instead, he walked to a clear patch of dirt near where his horse stood. He knelt down and began drawing in the dirt with his finger. Sarah moved closer, careful not to get too close. She looked at what he was drawing. He made a series of lines and symbols. He pointed to the sky, then to his drawing, then to the west. He was trying to tell her something. Sarah watched carefully. He drew what looked like clouds. He made motions with his hands like wind blowing. Then he held up fingers. 2 fingers. He pointed to the west again. Sarah thought she understood. He was telling her about weather. A storm was coming in 2 days from the west. He was warning her. She nodded to show she understood. The warrior stood up. He looked at her for a moment, then got back on his horse and left. 2 days later, just as the warrior had indicated, a massive storm rolled in from the west. The wind was so strong it nearly ripped the shutters off Sarah's windows. Rain pounded the roof. Thunder shook the walls. Sarah had prepared because of the warning. She had brought in extra firewood. She had secured everything outside. She had moved her chickens into the small shed. The storm lasted through the night, but Sarah and her home survived with no damage. After that day, Sarah decided to leave something for the warrior. The next time she made bread, she wrapped an extra loaf in clean cloth. She walked out to the flat rock where the warrior usually stopped his horse. She placed the bread there and went back to her cabin. The next morning, the bread was gone. This became another pattern. Sarah would leave bread on the rock. It would disappear. She never saw the warrior take it, but she knew it was him. Once she left dried apples too. Another time she left a small jar of honey from her 2 beehives. These offerings always disappeared. Then one day the warrior arrived with something himself. He rode up to his usual spot. Sarah was outside stirring a pot of laundry over a fire. The warrior held up a bundle of plants. He rode a little closer than usual and tossed the bundle onto the ground between them. Then he pointed to his arm and made a gesture like he was in pain. Then he pointed to the plants. Sarah understood. These were medicine plants. He was giving her medicine. Sarah walked over and picked up the plants. She recognized some of them. Others she had never seen before. She looked up at the warrior and nodded her thanks. He nodded back. It was the first gift exchange between them. As more weeks passed, they began to communicate better. The warrior knew some Spanish words. Sarah knew a tiny bit of Spanish from a family that had lived near her in town. Between Spanish, hand gestures, and drawings in the dirt, they started to share information. Sarah learned that the warrior's name was something that sounded like Ashki when he said it. She tried to say it back. He corrected her pronunciation several times until she got it closer to right. Ashki taught her words in his language. He pointed to the sun and said a word. He pointed to water, to rocks, to plants, and gave her the words. Sarah repeated them over and over, trying to get them right. Some of the sounds were hard for her to make. Ashki was patient. He would repeat words slowly. Sarah taught him more English words, too. She would point to things and say the English word clearly. Ashki would repeat them. His accent was strong, but he was a quick learner. Sarah realized he already knew quite a bit of English, more than he had let on at first. He must have learned it from somewhere before. Maybe from traders or missionaries. One afternoon, Ashki arrived with a wound on his arm. Sarah noticed it right away. Blood had soaked through a rough bandage. The bandage looked dirty. The wound looked bad. Sarah knew about infections. She had seen what happened when wounds were not cared for properly. She had lost Thomas to fever. But before that, she had nursed him through many smaller illnesses and injuries. Sarah pointed to Ashki's arm and then to her cabin. She made the gesture for him to come. Ashki hesitated. Sarah could see him thinking about it. This was a big risk for both of them. If his people knew he had gone into a white woman's cabin, there could be trouble. If anyone from town found out Sarah had brought an Apache into her home, she could be in real danger. They both knew this. But the wound was bad. Ashki could see the concern in Sarah's face. After a long moment, he slid down from his horse. This was the first time they had stood close to each other. Sarah was tall for a woman, but Ashki was taller. He was lean and muscular. His face was weathered but young. Sarah led him to her cabin door. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. She opened the door and gestured for him to come inside. The cabin was small. There was one main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and Sarah's bed in the corner. There was a small storage area in the back. Everything was simple and plain but clean. Ashki looked around carefully. He was alert, like an animal in an unfamiliar place. But he followed Sarah to the table and sat down in the chair she pointed to. Sarah gathered her supplies. She had clean cloths, water she had boiled that morning, and some whiskey Thomas had left. She also had the medicine plants Ashki had given her weeks ago. She had dried them carefully even though she was not sure exactly how to use them. Now she wished she had asked him. She worked carefully on Ashki's wound. She removed the dirty bandage. The wound was deep, probably from a knife. It was red around the edges and starting to show signs of infection. Sarah cleaned it with the boiled water first. Ashki did not make a sound, though she knew it must hurt. Then she used some of the whiskey. This time Ashki's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. Sarah crushed some of the medicine plants he had given her and mixed them with a little water to make a paste. She hoped she was doing this right. She spread the paste gently over the wound. Then she wrapped it with clean cloth, tying it firmly but not too tight. The whole time she worked, she could feel Ashki watching her. When she finished, she stepped back. Ashki looked at the bandage. He touched it gently. Then he looked at Sarah and spoke a word in his language. Sarah did not know what the word meant, but she thought it might be, "Thank you." Ashki stood up to leave. He moved toward the door. But before he left, he turned back. He pointed to Sarah and said her name. She had told him her name weeks ago. He said Sarah with his accent, but it was clear enough. Then he pointed to himself and said his name again. Ashki. Then he said something else in his language, a longer phrase. Ashki's wound healed well. Sarah knew because he kept coming back to her cabin. At first he came so she could check the bandage and put fresh medicine on it. But even after the wound healed, the visits continued. They had crossed some invisible line when Ashki had entered her cabin. Neither of them spoke about it, but something had changed between them. Their friendship grew slowly, like a plant pushing up through hard ground. Each visit brought small moments of understanding. Ashki taught Sarah how to read the desert. He showed her which plants could be eaten and which were poison. He taught her which insects meant rain was coming. He explained how to find water by watching where birds flew in the evening. Sarah had lived in the desert for years, but she had never really seen it before. Through Ashki's eyes, the empty land became full of life and meaning. One day, Ashki brought her a piece of root. He showed her how to chew it when she had a headache. Another time, he taught her how to make a tea from certain leaves that would help her sleep better. Sarah had been having trouble sleeping since Thomas died. The tea worked. For the first time in months, she slept through the night without waking up in tears. Sarah shared her knowledge too. She showed Ashki her garden and explained how she had learned to grow vegetables in the difficult desert soil. She taught him about crop rotation and saving seeds. Ashki was interested in everything. He asked questions using his mix of English, Spanish, and hand gestures. Sarah did her best to answer. They also continued to share music. This had been their first connection, and it remained important. Sarah taught Ashki more Irish songs. He taught her Apache songs. Some of his songs had words, and he taught her what the words meant. Many of the songs were about the land, about mountains and rivers and sky. Some were about animals. One beautiful song was about an eagle flying free. When Ashki sang that one, his voice was full of sadness. Sarah understood why. His people were not free anymore. They were being pushed and hunted and confined. As the weeks turned into months, they began to talk about deeper things. Ashki's English was getting better, and Sarah was learning more of his language. They could have real conversations now, even if the sentences were simple and sometimes confused. Ashki told Sarah about his life. He had been born in these mountains. His father had been a warrior and a leader. His mother had died when he was young. He had learned to ride and hunt and fight when he was still a boy. He had a sister and 2 younger brothers. They were all still alive, living with their band in the mountains to the north. Ashki explained that he was a scout and sometimes a translator. He had learned English and Spanish from missionaries when he was younger. His father had made him learn. His father had understood that the world was changing. He had wanted his son to know the white man's language so their people could negotiate and understand what was happening to them. But knowing the language had not stopped the fighting. It had not stopped the settlers from taking more and more land. It had not stopped the soldiers from attacking Apache camps. Sarah told Ashki about her life too. She told him about Ireland and the hunger that had driven her family to America. She told him about growing up poor in Boston. She told him about meeting Thomas at a church social and how they had decided to come west together for a fresh start. She told him about Thomas's death and how alone she had felt afterward. She did not cry when she told him these things, but her voice was quiet and sad. Ashki listened carefully to everything she said. One afternoon, Ashki brought up something that made Sarah uncomfortable. He asked her why she stayed on the land alone. He wanted to know why she did not go back to the town where there were other white people. Sarah thought about it for a long time before answering. Finally, she told him the truth. The people in town did not understand her. They thought she was strange. The men looked at her like she was property that needed a new owner. The women whispered about her behind their hands. And besides, this land was hers now. She and Thomas had worked hard for it. She was not ready to give it up just because he was gone. Ashki nodded like he understood. He said something that surprised Sarah. He said she was like his people. She was holding on to her home even though others wanted to take it away. She was staying even though it was dangerous and hard. He said there was honor in that. Sarah felt her throat get tight when he said that. Nobody had told her there was honor in her choice. Everyone had just told her she was being foolish. But even as their friendship deepened, Sarah knew they were living in a dangerous situation. The Arizona Territory was full of tension. The Apache were fighting to keep their land and their way of life. The settlers and the army were pushing to take more territory. There were stories of violence on both sides. Sarah heard these stories every time she went into town for supplies. Sarah made the trip to town about once a month. She hated going, but she needed things she could not make herself: salt and flour and coffee, thread and needles, sometimes ammunition for her rifle, though she rarely used it. The town was called Redemption. It was a rough place with one main street. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, and about 20 houses. Maybe 100 people lived there. Everyone knew everyone else's business. On one trip to town, Sarah was in the general store when she heard men talking. They were discussing Apache raids. One man said that a ranch had been attacked 20 miles west. He said the Apache had stolen horses and supplies. Another man said it was only going to get worse. He said the army needed to do more to clear the Apache out. A third man said something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He said the only good Apache was a dead Apache. The other men laughed and agreed. Sarah kept her head down and finished her shopping as quickly as possible. But as she was leaving, the storekeeper stopped her. His name was Mr. Gaines. He was a large man with a red face and small eyes. He asked Sarah how she was managing out at her place. She said she was managing fine. He looked at her with a strange expression. He said she should be careful. He said Apache had been spotted in her area. He said a woman alone was an easy target. Sarah thanked him for the warning and left. But his words stayed with her. She knew that Ashki had been seen near her property. Of course he had. He came there regularly. So far, no one seemed to have connected his presence to her. They just thought he was moving through the area. But what if someone saw him at her cabin? What if someone saw them talking? Sarah realized she needed to be more careful. She told Ashki about this the next time he visited. They were sitting in the shade of her cabin. It was summer now, and the heat was brutal in the middle of the day. Sarah explained what she had heard in town. She told him about the man who said the army needed to clear out the Apache. She told him about the warning that Apache had been seen near her land. Ashki listened with a serious face. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Finally, Ashki spoke. He told Sarah that his people were in trouble. The army had been attacking camps. They had killed women and children. They had burned food supplies. His band was running out of places to hide. They were hungry and tired. Some of the warriors wanted to fight harder. Others wanted to try to make peace. But nobody trusted the white men's promises anymore. Too many promises had been broken before. Ashki also told Sarah something else. He said that some of the warriors in his band knew about her. They knew he had been visiting a white woman. Some of them were angry about it. They said he was a traitor. They said he should not trust any white person. Ashki had defended himself. He had told them that Sarah was different. He had told them she had helped him when he was wounded. But not everyone believed him. Some thought he was being foolish. Just like Sarah's people would think she was being foolish. Sarah felt fear settle in her stomach. This friendship was dangerous for both of them. They were caught between two worlds that hated each other. Neither of them truly belonged anywhere anymore. Sarah was too friendly with the Apache to fit in with the settlers. Ashki was too friendly with a white woman to fit in completely with his own people. They were both outsiders now, but despite the danger, neither of them suggested ending the visits. They both knew they should probably stop seeing each other. It would be the smart thing to do. The safe thing, but neither of them wanted to. This friendship had become important to both of them. It was like water in the desert, rare and precious and necessary for survival. As summer burned on, Ashki taught Sarah more about his people's way of seeing the world. He explained that his people believed everything was connected. The land, the animals, the sky, the people, everything was part of one great web. When you harmed one part, you harmed all parts. This was why his people were so upset about what was happening. The white men were breaking the web. They were killing the buffalo and damming the rivers and digging holes in the mountains. They were taking without asking and destroying without thinking. Sarah listened to these ideas and found they made sense to her. She had grown up with Christian teachings about man having dominion over nature, but Ashki's way of thinking felt more true somehow. She could see the evidence of what he was talking about. The settlers did take without asking. They did destroy without thinking. She had seen it herself, but Sarah also tried to explain her people to Ashki. The visit from the marshal changed everything. Sarah and Ashki both knew they had to be more careful. Ashki started coming later in the evening when darkness could hide his approach. He did not stay as long. They stopped sitting outside in the open. Everything became more secretive and rushed. The easy friendship they had built began to feel strained under the weight of danger. Summer faded into fall. The brutal heat broke, replaced by cooler winds from the north. Sarah prepared for winter by preserving vegetables and checking the roof for leaks. She saw Ashki less often now. Sometimes 2 weeks would pass between visits. She missed him. She missed their talks and the way he made her feel less alone. But she understood why he had to stay away more. His band was moving, trying to avoid the army patrols that were sweeping through the territory. Things were getting worse. When Ashki did come, he looked tired and worried. His clothes were more worn. His face was thinner. He told Sarah that food was scarce. The army had been destroying Apache food stores and driving away the game. His people were hungry. Some were sick. The winter would be hard. Sarah gave him whatever she could spare. Dried beans and cornmeal. Some salted meat. It was not much, but Ashki took it with gratitude. In early November, Sarah made her monthly trip to town. The atmosphere there had changed. There were more soldiers around. More guns, more angry talk. In the general store, she heard men planning what they called a hunting party. They were going to ride out and track down Apache camps. They talked about it like they were going after animals, not people. Sarah felt sick listening to them. She bought her supplies quickly and left. On the way back to her cabin, Sarah passed a family in a wagon heading toward town. They looked frightened. The man told Sarah they had abandoned their homestead after finding tracks around their property. He said it was not safe out there anymore. He said Sarah should come to town too. Sarah thanked him but said she would be fine. But after they left, she sat on her wagon seat for a long time thinking, was she being foolish staying out there alone? Was her pride going to get her killed? But when she got home and saw her small cabin and her garden, and the land Thomas had died to claim, she knew she could not leave. This was her home. Right or wrong, smart or foolish, she was staying. 2 weeks passed with no word from Ashki. Sarah began to worry. Had something happened to him? Had he been caught by the army? Was he wounded or sick? She had no way to find out. She did not even know exactly where his band was camped. All she could do was wait and hope. Then on a cold morning in late November, everything fell apart. Sarah was inside her cabin making breakfast when she heard gunshots in the distance. They were far away but clear in the still morning air. Her heart jumped. Gunshots meant fighting. Fighting meant danger. She grabbed her rifle and went to the door. She could not see anything from her cabin, but the shots continued. Pop, pop, pop. Then several shots all at once. Then silence. Sarah stood frozen in her doorway. She did not know what to do. Should she hide? Should she ride to town? Should she load her rifle and prepare to defend herself? Before she could decide, she heard something else, hoofbeats coming fast. Coming toward her. Sarah raised her rifle, her hands shaking. A horse appeared over the rise. One horse, one rider. Sarah's breath caught. It was Ashki, but something was wrong. Very wrong. Ashki was bent over his horse, holding on to the animal's neck. Even from a distance, Sarah could see blood. His horse was stumbling, exhausted. They were heading straight for her cabin. Behind them, more hoofbeats. Sarah looked and saw 3 more riders coming over the rise. Army scouts. They were chasing Ashki. They were shooting at him. Time seemed to slow down. Sarah understood in that moment that she had a choice to make. A choice that would change everything. She could go back inside her cabin and pretend she saw nothing. She could let Ashki ride past and let the scouts catch him. That would be the safe choice. The smart choice. Nobody could blame her for not helping. He was Apache. There was a war going on. It would be suicide to help him. But Sarah thought about all the months of friendship. She thought about Ashki teaching her about the desert plants and warning her about storms. She thought about him sharing his food when his own people were hungry. She thought about the quiet conversations and shared songs. She thought about how he had looked at her with respect when everyone else looked at her with pity. She thought about the fact that he was not just an Apache. He was Ashki. He was her friend. Maybe her only real friend. Sarah made her choice. She threw her rifle down and ran out into the yard. She waved her arms at Ashki, shouting. He saw her. His horse stumbled toward the cabin. Sarah could see how badly wounded he was now. Blood covered his side and leg. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion. The scouts were getting closer. They were shouting. Sarah could hear their voices now. Ashki's horse reached the cabin. Ashki slid off and nearly fell. Sarah caught him, surprised by how heavy he was. He was mostly unconscious, his eyes half closed. Sarah dragged him toward the cabin door. She was not strong enough to carry him, so she pulled him by his arms. Her back screamed in protest. She got him through the door just as the scouts reached her yard. Sarah left Ashki lying just inside the door. She ran back out and stood in front of her cabin. The 3 scouts pulled up their horses. They were breathing hard. Their faces were red and excited. These were not regular army soldiers. They were civilian scouts hired to track Apache. They were rough men who got paid for every Apache they found, dead or alive. The leader was a man with a scarred face and missing teeth. He looked at Sarah like she was a stupid child who had gotten in his way. He did not bother with politeness. He demanded to know where the Apache had gone. He said they had seen him ride right up to her cabin. He asked if the Apache was inside. Sarah felt everything inside her go cold and clear. She looked directly at the scarred man and lied. She lied without hesitation, without shame, without fear. She said she had seen a rider go past heading south toward the canyon. She said he had looked wounded. She said it looked like he was barely holding onto his horse. She pointed south and told them if they hurried, they could probably still catch him. The scarred man stared at her. He did not fully believe her. Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. He looked at her cabin door. He looked at his companions. He was thinking about searching the cabin. Sarah knew if they searched, they would find Ashki, and then they would kill him. And they might kill her too for hiding him. But then one of the other scouts said something. He said he had seen tracks heading south. He said the Apache was probably trying to reach the canyon where he could hide. The scarred man hesitated one more moment. Then he made his decision. He said something crude about Sarah being a foolish woman who did not know what she saw. Then he and the other scouts kicked their horses and rode south toward the canyon. Sarah stood watching them go. She did not move until they were completely out of sight. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard in the dirt. She was shaking all over. She had just lied to armed men. She had sent them in the wrong direction. She was hiding an Apache warrior in her cabin. If they came back and found out what she had done, she would be arrested. Or worse, But she could not think about that now. She had to help Ashki. Sarah stood up and went back inside. She barred the door behind her. Then she knelt down next to Ashki. He was unconscious now, his breathing shallow and quick. She needed to examine his wounds, but first she had to get him away from the door. With tremendous effort, Sarah dragged him over to her bed. She had to stop twice to rest. Finally, she got him onto the bed. Sarah cut away his shirt and examined his wounds. He had been shot twice, once in his side and once in his upper leg. Both wounds were bleeding badly. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She did not know if she could save him. These wounds were much worse than the knife cut she had treated before. He might die. Right here in her bed, Ashki might die. But Sarah pushed the panic down. She had work to do. She moved quickly, gathering everything she needed. Clean cloths, boiled water, whiskey, the medicine plants. She worked on the leg wound first because it was bleeding the most. She had to dig the bullet out. She had watched the town doctor do this once when Thomas's friend had been shot in a hunting accident. Her hands shook as she worked, but she kept going. She found the bullet and pulled it out. Fresh blood poured from the wound. Sarah packed it with cloths and pressed down hard. The side wound was worse. The bullet had gone deep. Sarah could not reach it with her fingers or her tools. It was still inside him. She cleaned the wound as best she could and packed it with medicine plants and cloth. She wrapped bandages around his whole torso, pulling them tight to stop the bleeding. Then she did the same with his leg. When she finished, her hands and dress were covered in blood. Ashki's blood. Sarah collapsed in her chair. She looked at Ashki lying in her bed, pale and barely breathing. She thought about the scouts and whether they would come back. She thought about what would happen if anyone found out what she had done. She thought about the fact that she had just thrown her entire life away for one man. A man from a people she had been taught to fear. A man she had known for only a few months. But even as these thoughts ran through her mind, for 3 days and 3 nights, Sarah fought to keep Ashki alive. She barely slept. She barely ate. All her energy went into caring for him. She changed his bandages every few hours. She forced water and medicine tea down his throat. She bathed him with cool cloths when the fever burned too high. She covered him with blankets when the chills made him shake. She talked to him constantly, telling him stories, singing songs, begging him not to die. The fever was the worst on the second night. Ashki thrashed and called out in his language. Sarah did not know what he was saying, but she heard pain and fear in his voice. She held him down so he would not tear open his wounds. She whispered soothing words even though she did not think he could hear her. She prayed to God, even though she was not sure God cared about an Apache warrior and a foolish white woman who had risked everything to save him. On the morning of the 4th day, something changed. Sarah woke from a brief sleep in her chair to find Ashki looking at her. His eyes were open and clear. The fever had broken. He was still very weak and pale, but he was conscious. He was alive. Sarah felt tears run down her face. She had not cried through the whole terrible ordeal, but now relief broke through her control. She wiped her eyes quickly and moved to the bed. She asked Ashki how he felt. He tried to answer, but his voice was just a whisper. She gave him water. He drank slowly, carefully. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Gratitude mixed with something else. Sadness, maybe, or guilt. Over the next few days, Ashki slowly grew stronger. He could sit up. He could eat small amounts of food. He could talk, though it tired him quickly. Sarah learned what had happened to him. The army scouts had attacked his band's camp at dawn. Many people had been killed. Women and children along with warriors. Ashki had been trying to lead the scouts away from the others when he was shot. He had been trying to save his family. He did not know if they had survived. Sarah saw the pain in Ashki's eyes when he talked about this. It was not just physical pain from his wounds. It was the pain of not knowing, the pain of loss. She understood that pain. She had felt it when Thomas died. The not knowing what to do next. The feeling that your whole world had fallen apart. As Ashki healed, they talked more. They talked about things they had never discussed before. Deep things, important things. Ashki told Sarah about what it was like watching his people's way of life disappear. He told her about the places that were sacred to his people, places that now had fences and buildings on them. He told her about the children who were being taken to boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language. He told her about the elders who were dying, taking their knowledge and stories with them. Sarah listened to all of this and felt something break inside her. She had known things were bad, but hearing it from Ashki made it real in a way it had never been before. These were not just stories. This was not ancient history. This was happening now. Right now. While she sat safe in her cabin, an entire people were being destroyed. She told Ashki about her own disillusionment. She talked about how she had believed the things she was taught as a child, that America was a land of freedom and opportunity, that civilization was spreading west, bringing progress and goodness. But now she could see that it was more complicated than that. Freedom for some meant slavery or death for others. Progress for settlers meant destruction for those who had been here first. Nothing was as simple as she had been taught. Ashki listened carefully to everything Sarah said. Then he told her something that surprised her. He said she was not responsible for what her people had done. Individual people could not carry the guilt of entire nations. What mattered was what each person chose to do with their own life. Sarah had chosen to see him as a person, not as an enemy. She had chosen to risk everything to save him. Those choices mattered. They would not stop the larger forces at work, but they mattered. 2 weeks after he had arrived bleeding at her door, Ashki was well enough to leave. The wounds were healing cleanly. He could walk without too much pain. He needed to try to find his band and see if his family had survived. Sarah knew he had to go, but she dreaded it. She had gotten used to having him there. The cabin had felt less lonely with someone else in it. The night before Ashki planned to leave, they sat together by the fire. They did not talk much. There did not seem to be words for what they both felt. Finally, Ashki spoke. He told Sarah that he would never forget what she had done. He told her that she had proven something important. She had proven that people from different worlds could see past hatred and fear. She had proven that kindness was possible even in the darkest times. Sarah said she had not done anything special. She had just helped a friend who needed help. But Ashki shook his head. He said it was special. Most people would not have done what she did. Most people chose safety over courage. Most people chose fear over friendship. Sarah had chosen differently, and that mattered more than she knew. The next morning, Ashki prepared to leave. He moved slowly, still recovering from his wounds. Sarah packed food for him. Dried meat, bread, some precious coffee. It was not much, but it was all she could spare. She also gave him a clean shirt to replace the one she had cut off him. It had been Thomas's shirt. Ashki put it on carefully, mindful of his healing wounds. They stood outside the cabin in the early morning light. Neither of them wanted to say goodbye. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but pushed them back. She told Ashki to be careful. He promised he would. Then he said something in his language. Sarah asked what it meant. He thought for a moment, searching for the English words. Finally, he said it meant something like sister of my spirit. He said she was family to him now. Family beyond blood or tribe. Family by choice. Before Ashki left, he told Sarah one more thing. He said his people had heard about her. Word had spread among the Apache bands about the white woman who had saved one of their warriors. Some thought she was a spy or a fool, but others, especially the elders, thought she was something different. They thought she was a bridge between worlds. They had asked him to tell her that she would always be safe from Apache warriors. No one from his people would harm her or her property. This was a promise given by the elders themselves. Sarah was stunned by this. She had not expected anything like that. She had just helped a friend. But now that friend's entire people were offering her protection, she did not know what to say. Ashki smiled at her confusion. He said sometimes one small act of courage could ripple outward farther than anyone expected. Then he got on his horse, raised his hand in farewell, and rode away toward the northern mountains. Sarah stood watching until he was out of sight. Then she went back into her cabin. It felt empty now. She looked at the bed where Ashki had lain fighting for his life. She looked at the blood stains on her floor that she had not been able to scrub away completely. She looked at her hands, still rough and scarred from the work of caring for him. Sarah knew her life had changed forever. She could not go back to the person she had been before. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had chosen a side, and it was not the side most white people would approve of. She had chosen humanity over tribe. She had chosen friendship over fear. In the weeks that followed, Sarah did see Ashki once more. He came late at night moving quietly. He brought news. His sister and one brother had survived the attack. His other brother and his uncle had been killed. His band was moving even farther north, trying to find a safe place. but there were no safe places left. The army was everywhere. The end was coming for his people's way of life. Ashki also brought Sarah something. It was a gift from the elders. A beautiful woven basket made with traditional designs. Inside the basket was a bundle of sacred herbs and a small carved stone. Ashki explained that the stone had been blessed by a medicine woman. It was meant to keep Sarah safe and remind her that she had friends among the Apache people. That was the last time Sarah saw Ashki alive. A few months later, in the spring of 1877, she heard news in town that made her sick with grief. There had been a battle between army troops and an Apache band. Several warriors had been killed. The names were not given, but Sarah knew in her heart that Ashki had been among them. She felt it like a physical blow. For weeks after hearing that news, Sarah could barely function. She went through her daily tasks like a ghost. She felt angry and sad and helpless all at once. She wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. A good man, a brave man, a kind man was gone. Killed in a war that never should have happened. Killed defending a way of life that was already lost. But as time passed, Sarah began to understand something. Ashki was gone, but what they had shared was not gone. The friendship they had built, the understanding they had reached, the barrier they had broken down between their peoples, that was still real. That still mattered. Ashki had told her that she was a bridge between worlds. Now she understood what that meant. She had a responsibility to remember, to tell the truth about what had happened, to make sure people knew that the Apache were not savage enemies. They were people. Human beings with families and feelings and rights. Sarah began to write. She kept journals where she recorded everything Ashki had taught her.